joining me tonight, everybody. I'm just going to go through a few key things in terms of the transition to senior school is the first thing, because I think that is something that can be a little bit tricky, the differences between primary and secondary school English, because we move into a different stage. So we've done stage 1 and stage 2 in primary school. You then move into stage 3, you then move into stage 4 for years 7 and 8, and that there's actually a massive jump from stage 3 to stage 4 English. So where in primary school students are looking at some basic kind of texts that are not too difficult conceptually, and what they're asked to do with those texts is fairly simple when we compare it to what students are asked to do in high school, particularly if you're at a selective high school or an independent high school. It can be the way that we backward map English to even year 7 at a lot of schools means that it can be a little bit tricky, that jump. So what happens is the texts become far more challenging. And if they're not more challenging, what we're asking the students to do is more challenging. So in terms of what those tasks look like, really what we're looking at is deep analysis and evaluation of text. And we have to do it around some really core things. So students will be asked to look at text in terms of their purpose, their form, their context, their ideas and values. And that can be really tricky, because we're not just talking about themes in a text, which is often what you do in primary school. And you might look at a little bit at representational element. But now it's really understanding the student that texts are a construction, that they're all subjective. We look at it through a reader response lens, and the way that meaning is not just made by the composer, but also the way that we make meaning when we analyse the text. And that can be quite tricky sometimes for students to get their heads around. The critical analysis is the important part, and sometimes what students have find difficult is that movement from explaining what is happening in a text to explaining why something is happening and the significance of that in terms of the way a text is positioning us as responders. And that can be really tricky. So the assignments that students have to do, or the assessments, they require a lot more. They're more detailed, they're longer, and students are now, rather than in primary school where there might be some short answer questions that students have to do, or they've got to write a little persuasive speech or a little bit of a narrative. And the narratives in the persuasive speeches are not very long. Think of NAPLAN style thing. Now, yes, we do NAPLAN, but it's really just a basic literacy test. And so what we ask students to do, and normally what students will be doing from year 7 is they'll be writing essays, and if not essays, they'll be writing analytical paragraphs, which are essentially what an essay is made up of. So the body of an essay is made up of an introduction, or the essay itself is made up of an introduction, a series of body paragraphs and a conclusion, but those body paragraphs are where students have to be deeply analytical. So they're required to really have a strong understanding, like I said, of how meaning is shaped in a text. And that means that students, rather than what they find difficult, are things like writing a thesis statement for a paragraph. So a thesis statement in, even that term, or a point sentence they would have learned in primary school, would be something like, text A explores power, the idea of power. And that's sufficient in primary school. But when we get to high school, we're looking for a much deeper understanding, conceptual understanding of a text. And so students have to extrapolate that idea. And it's not just that a text explores power, because that could be anything, but it is what specific ideas about power does the text explore? And in terms of that specific idea, what is the meaning that we're meant to get out of it? what's the purpose of the composer in representing that idea about power? So perhaps if we look at something like a Shakespearean play like Macbeth, one of the things that Shakespeare is saying to us is, or teaching us, and it's a didactic text, is that overzealous ambition, and ambition, that idea that you want to achieve power and you're willing to do anything for it, has kind of dire ramifications when you transgress moral boundaries. And that's really hard for students to grapple with. But there's some of the things that we're asking students to do in high school. And in Year 7, we're not asking them to go to that level. But it could be something on, I don't know, they're doing a little text, a novel, and rather than being about love in the novel, what students might have to say is, the way that passion without kind of rational balance can have dangerous consequences. That would be something that we might expect a Year 7 student to be able to grapple with, and to be able to say that in their point sentence. And then what students have to do, unlike their plan, where, you can, for NAPLAN, you back up your points. You don't have to have a lot of evidence, and the evidence is really general. Now what we're requiring students to do is to have very specific evidence, and it must include a technique, a quote, and that has to be analysed in terms of the overall purpose of the text. And so there's a lot of information now that students have to remember. So the cognitive load of what students have to remember increases significantly. And obviously, you're doing all of that under exam conditions. So there is an element of recall that students have to have. And that means that you need to know your text really, really well, whatever text it is, whether it's a play, whether it's a film, whether it is a novel, you need to have a deep understanding of it. And that's the other thing that we do in high school English, is we study a range of texts. So whereas in the Victorian system, there's a media studies unit and so on, we incorporate that into English in the New South Wales system. And what that means is that students have to have an understanding of the meta language, so the specific language that goes with different text types and different genres of text. So, for example, the language of film is very different to the language of a novel, to the language of a play, and so on. So in a film, we might be talking about different shot types and jump cuts and flashbacks and etc. With a novel, you're talking about characterization, setting. You might be talking about narrative voice and so on. So the language that you're using is actually different, let alone the fact that you then have to have evidence for each of those things, and then you have to analyse that evidence. So that can be really tricky. So part of this is the expectations there are much higher. And those expectations are around, as I said, analytical and critical thinking. Students are expected to not just interpret text and not just look at when we think about a text, you're looking at matter, meaning of method. So matter is kind of on the surface. The method is the way that a text communicates its meaning. And the meaning is that deeper level that we go to. And so students really have to do a deep dive into their text to uncover that. The essays that they have to write and the assignments are analytical, and they have to be constructed using well-supported arguments. And as I said before, students have to have a depth and breadth of understanding. Not only that, but we also require students to be really creative. And that creativity in high school, one of the things that we notice is that students come into high school and they write, they'll be decent creative writers, but a lot of that writing will be purple prose. So a lot of times in primary school, they're taught to use lots of adjectives and to describe things. And in actual fact, that kills your writing in high school. We don't want that purple prose. It's very much like, Victoria, that Victorian kind of style of writing. Think of Charles Dickens. And what we want in high school is we want students to come to creative pieces with a really strong personal voice. And it's really thinking about how you develop that strong personal voice, and reading a range of texts is really important for that, and writing a range of texts. So a lot of times people think the silver bullet to success in English is reading. And reading's really important, don't get me wrong, it's super important. But it has to be balanced with writing. Too often students read a lot and they don't write a lot. And they'll be very good verbally at telling you what they want to do, how they want to do it, and so on. But getting that down into a logical sequence of ideas, into a story that is engaging and is driven by purpose, is a completely different thing again. So it's about creating moments where students have the opportunity to not just read, but to write. When we get to high school, there is a greater emphasis on independent learning. We want students to be independent. We want them to be self-directed in their study and their research. We want them to take initiative in their learning and time management. And they need to develop a personal response to the text that they study. So that's really important, not looking for easy ways out, making sure that they are reading all of the texts that are set for study, and not just reading a text once, but to develop that personal understanding. It's about an appreciation of multiple readings of a text, that you can come to a text multiple times and you'll get something different out of it each time. That's what rich, high art literature does. Literature, Faye Weldon calls it literature with a capital L, and it stands at the gates of civilization, keeping the barbarians out. And that kind of literature is like an onion, and the more you read it, the more layers you're peeling back, and you're each time, you're arriving at different ways of thinking about the text, different ideas. And when students do that, it leads to a really rich understanding, and it comes through in their writing. So we really notice that even from year 7, when the best students that I've taught are the ones who are passionately engaged with literature. They're the really good writers. And there's a great sense of accomplishment that comes when you're able to come at a text like that. Students need to develop really strong note-taking and organisational skills. So I think one of the things that happens in English, and I see this a lot, is the teacher will be talking and students sit there and they don't take notes. And even in some of my tutoring classes, I have to say to students, no, we have to take lots of notes. The more that these students take notes, the better they will do. What a teacher has is a level of language and a deep reservoir of language that students don't have. And when we teach, when we're talking to students, we are deliberately using the language that we want students to use in their writing. Think of it like when you teach your child, or your students online, when mum and dad have taught you when you're really young to speak and to use language. And what they do is they model language for you, and you repeat that language. So our learning of language comes through repetition, through hearing it and then repeating it. And that process doesn't stop when you're in high school. You don't just automatically kind of develop language. That language comes from being surrounded by it. And so when we teach, when your teachers are teaching you, they will be using language that they want you to use. And that's really important. And taking notes in class is really significant, because what the research shows us is that when you leave a classroom, you will forget 80% of what is said if you don't write it down. And so it's really important to take those notes. And there's a lot of students who think, no, it'll be fine. I've got it, I'm listening, and I'm going to remember it. And the reality of it is the research doesn't back that up. It doesn't support it. The research says the opposite. It says you'll forget it, okay? Because you have it. What's happening is, particularly when that information is new, if you think about how our brain works, you haven't got any hooks for that information to be linked to in terms of your long-term memory. But when you write it down, what you're doing is you're learning that information. And then when you go home and you're reading that information, that repetition is enabling you to remember it. And it's helping you store that in your long-term memory. Because the other thing that you should do is when you're note-taking is find those hooks. What can I link that new information to? So particularly around text, there's a lot of knowledge about text and a lot of language around text that we expect students to know and to learn and to use in their writing. And the best way to be able to do that is to actually go home and read over your notes and then transform those notes. The best learners and the best students, every time I read their writing, whether it's at school, whether it's at the tutoring college, wherever, are the students who really think about what they're writing and are really detailed. So detailed in their notes. And they plan. And when you're taking notes, it's a really important preparation for your exams. And that planning aspect of it. Too often what happens is students get into an exam, we said in year 7, and they automatically start writing. And the trick is to not do that, is to not look at everybody else and not just start writing because everybody else is, but to actually think about what you're going to write and to make a few little notes and just take a minute or two, no longer than 2 minutes, but even the HSC, take a couple of minutes. Because when you do that, that processing of that question and making those connections will allow you to hit the bullseye of the question. And too often what happens, and so many students will say, oh, I didn't answer the question. But of course, you didn't give yourself the opportunity to come to grips with the question in the first place. And it's really important that you do that. And NESA is on to these regurgitated answers. So that's why they're making the HSC questions far more specific. It's because they want you to have that cognitive flexibility under exam pressure. That's really important. And too often it's a skill that students don't practice. So using, organising notes, writing notes. There's the Cornell note-taking system, which you can look up online, but it's a really effective note-taking system, not only for English, but it's an effective note-taking system for all of your subjects, particularly subjects that are very content-heavy, subjects like science and so on. It's really important to be organised. Too often students have stuff everywhere, and that is totally unhelpful. You need to have things organised. Keep all of your things, keep all of your responses in a folder, and it all should be dated, and you should have all of your feedback. And even online, often what I see are students with folders everywhere they've got on their computer. And sometimes, I guess, if you looked at my desktop, I've probably got a whole lot of files on there, and you'd think that is really unorganised. But what I do is I put my files on my desktop and then, or in my documents, and then, every week I actually then file them away into the appropriate folder so I can easily access information. So that's really important for students as well. You need to review and update those notes regularly. So you're adding to your notes continually. That's really important. And as I said, the most successful students are those with really effective and detailed notes. They're the students who have, for English, how do you write effective notes? If you're studying a novel, what you do, or a play, or whatever it is in English, in terms of in terms of the essay writing and so on. So, and in any kind of analytical aspect, what you do is you create tables. Your notes should be in tables, and you would have, the idea, then examples of that idea in terms of quotes from the text with the technique that goes with it, with an explanation. So that's really important that you're able to create those tables. And at the end, if I've got some time, I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. So we need a detailed note. The other thing to do for English is to, do practice papers, particularly if you know, to practice those comprehension skills, practice papers under timed conditions, and ask your teachers for those. Which brings me to this part, which is the practice papers. So you need to practice time management and set realistic goals. So use digital calendars, schedule your study time, set SMART goals. So make sure your goals are specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're relevant, they're time-bound. Set things like if you're sitting, if you're receiving, B's consistently in English, and maybe it's in the low B range. So that's out of 20, you'd be receiving 13 or 14 out of 20. It would be lovely if we could go from that to, 20 out of 20. But really, the best thing to do is actually think about, well, if I'm at a 13 or 14, what do I need to do to get to a 15 or 16? What do I need to do to get to the middle and then the high range of that band? And so you set that goal. And you speak to your teachers about that, and you look at your writing and you look at exemplars and so on. Then once you achieve that, then you're looking at, well, how do I get into the A range, etc. Now, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't attempt to get into the A range if I'm sitting in the B range. Of course I should, but should I be disappointed if I don't get there straight away? And the answer to that is no. You think of a swimmer, they're just trying to shave off milliseconds from their time. That's what they're trying to achieve. So, small, measurable increments are really important. The other thing is to break tasks down into manageable chunks. Too often what students do is they approach English in a way that is, I've got an essay to write, so I'm going to have to sit down and write it. And that's probably the worst way to approach it. It leads to procrastination. It leads to a sense of, I can't do this, because what you've done is you've taken this kind of monstrous task of writing an essay, and often it's the first time you've written an essay on that particular module or test, and you're trying to attack all of it at the one time. And you've got to think about writing an essay like cooking. You're doing you're doing it bit by bit. We don't bake a cake and just throw all the ingredients in. And we don't write an essay by just going at it and doing the whole thing at once. Instead, break it down. Break it into manageable chunks. Before you do that, and the first manageable chunk is do a plan. So plan the essay. Think it through in terms of the question. Too often, students won't even write a plan. And they won't even have the question at the top of the page, which is really, I find that really interesting. You have to have the question there so that you're constantly referring to it. But the way to break it down into chunks is to think, well, tonight I'm going to write my introduction. Or if you can't think of your introduction, sometimes it's like, tonight I'm going to write a paragraph, the first paragraph. And, it might be on the idea of power. And I'm going to start by writing my thesis. What do I think? And asking yourself questions. What really is the text saying about power? Okay, I'm going to construct a thesis statement around that. And then what are my pieces of evidence that I'm going to use? And then putting that together. So you're kind of slowly massaging the paragraph. And then you do your next paragraph and then the next one. And what you do is you write it simply. I had a student ask me about writing paragraphs the other day, and what I was saying is too often another problem that students, or a trap that students fall into, is they try to sound really erudite. I've got to sound as smart as I can. And English teachers see through that. It's not about sounding really smart. It's about sounding like you know what you're talking about and you can answer a question. And sometimes the best way to do that, and oftentimes the best way to do it, is to write the answer, write your paragraph in a really simple way. And then you can go back and you can fix it up. Kind of like when you're building a house. You put up the frame first, and the frame's not pretty. It doesn't have to be pretty, but what the frame has to do is it has to be really stable, right? Because you don't want that house falling down. So get the idea right, do the frame, which is write it in a basic way, and then all the other stuff, the aesthetic stuff, when you're designing a room and you're putting all the furniture in and everything, that's like the fancy word. Then you can go back and put those in. You can kind of zhuzh up your paragraph. So that would be one of my key tips, and that's part of breaking it down to those manageable chunks. Complete practice papers under time conditions. That's really important, to a range of questions and to a range of really difficult questions, not the easy ones. It's no use doing the easy ones. It's like the maths paper. Why do the easy ones when you know it? You need to do the harder ones, right? You need to do the questions that make you think, where all the cognitive work's got to go on. Do those questions, because that will test whether or not you truly understand the text and how to answer questions on it. Seek feedback from your teachers and peers. That's really important, seeking teacher feedback, particularly around the module and what the expectations of your teacher are. The expectations, particularly in the junior years of English, can differ from school to school. Schools have different ways of doing things. Yes, we have a syllabus, but the way that's interpreted can be quite variable. And when I say that, I mean in terms of the expectations of what students write in terms of internal assessment. So where one school might be privileging lots of techniques, another one won't. I can tell you in the HSC, that's not what it is. It's the conceptual ideas. But it just depends. So it's really important for students to ask the teacher, what are the expectations around this task? What do I really need to be doing? And to seek feedback from their peers as well. Peer feedback is really important. Work together. The one thing that I would say, though, is don't become reliant on the teacher. Too often what happens is students think that they're continually going to the teacher. So feedback after feedback after feedback from the teacher. What that does is it creates learned helplessness. And that's not what we want. We want independent learners. Don't badger your teacher continually, because then the work doesn't become yours, it's the teacher's. And really the result, therefore, isn't yours, it's your teacher's. So if you're an authentic learner, yes, you get your teacher's feedback, but you need to go away and you need to think about that. You need to have your questions, and then you go back to your teacher with questions, not rewriting it and half reading the feedback and then going, oh, and I've done this, and now can you mark this task? And then you go away and do it again, and now can you mark this? And now that's learned helplessness. What you need to do is be independent, seek your teacher's feedback, but really be thinking about what you need to do and implement that feedback. That's really important. So yes, the teacher's feedback is important, but again, don't do it in such a way that it becomes learned helplessness, because that's no good to anybody. The importance of English, that should be the importance of reading in English. And all right, you need to read a lot. And Top Logic have reading guides for you, comprehensive reading guides. That's really important. But when you read a range of different texts, not the same text. So you're reading a range of texts in different, when I say range of texts, in different genres. Don't read the same genre, and read more fiction text. But if it's then say non-fiction texts like biographies and so on, instead be reading fiction. Particularly fantasy fiction, that's really good for your language structures and your reservoirs of language, to build those up. The other one is to read things like Time magazine, National Geographic. The language structures in those, the grammatical structures, lexical choices and so on, are really important and significant ways that you can build your ability to use sophisticated language structures that make your writing more precise and meaningful. Develop good reading habits. So have, a time of the evening where you're going to read. Reading is meditative. It should be this beautiful time where you lose yourself in a book. So create the space to do that. Stick to a reading, and stick to that reading schedule. It's like it becomes Pavlovian. So you actually then start looking forward to it, and you start doing it each day, and read from a variety of genres. In terms of now, you move to the HSC and preparing for your HSC exam. How can you do that in terms of English? You need to familiarise yourself with the syllabus and the modules. It's really important. The syllabus meaning the rubrics from that syllabus. What are they requiring you to do? The other thing to do is to look at all the past papers, work on previous exam papers, get a feel for the format and the types of questions, have a look at the way the questions are developing over time. You'll notice that for different modules, the questions, might be becoming more difficult and so on. What I can tell you is the way that the HSC is structured for English, the HSC exam, is that not all, they won't make it so you've got 3 really difficult questions. So you do 2 papers. Paper 1 has an essay and short answer comprehension, and it's all around the area. So it's all around text and human experiences. The next one, and that's the module that everybody's got to do, but they do different texts within that. You've also got to do Module A, Module B, and Module C, and that's in Paper 2. Paper 2, so Paper 1 is kind of an easier paper. It's 90 minutes, it's short answer comprehension, so it's not too hard, and then you do the essay and you've got 45 minutes for the essay. And the essay is not too difficult. And that section is where students, there's a corollary with the standard paper. So the advanced paper and the standard paper are similar. And there's crossover. When we get to Paper 2, that is not the case, and it's hard. It is a 2-hour exam. Every section requires extended responses. They need to be deeply analytical for the 2, for Module A and Module B. And Module C is the creative part, the craft of writing. Those, that paper as well, you've got 40 minutes for each one. It's a tricky paper, and it's really important that students are familiar with the format of it. But in terms of the way that paper is designed, it's not designed so that you get 3 really hard questions. Instead, the way that papers are designed is that there will be the cognitive load will be on one particular module. So they might choose that Module C is going to be the module this year that has that where the cognitive load will be, which will mean that will be the hard question. The other questions won't be that easy, but they'll be quite accessible for students if they know their stuff. So there is an expectation that, yes, there will be one question that's a little bit tricky, that you've really got to do some thinking about. And so the way you approach that is leave the difficult question to last, because what you're giving yourself then is time to think about how to attack it. And you'll have, when you're doing the other questions, you'll have time to, or there'll be a moment probably when you're writing your answer where you have that aha moment. You go, that's what I've got to do for that question. When that happens, you write it down quickly somewhere, you scribble it down and go, that's how I'm going to attack that. Keep going back to your other question and do it. And then, it makes that more difficult question easier to do. So there's a real strategy in the way that you attack an English exam. And I think what happens is sometimes students get into a really rigid way of, I'm going to just do the paper from question, the first question, so Module A to Module C. I'm just going to do it that way and it doesn't matter. And I think that's dangerous because, like I said, if Module A is the easy question, if Module A is a really hard question, I should say, then what will happen is you'll either not answer the question or you'll take up too much time and then you won't have enough time on the other question. And so it then becomes a time management issue. Okay, should you choose Advanced English Extension 1 or Extension 2? And that all depends. They are very different courses. Advanced English is the one subject, the only one that you study in Year 12, where every single top student converges. The only subject. It doesn't happen in Extension 1, doesn't happen in Extension 2. The same with Extension 2 maths. There could be brilliant mathematicians out there who actually would prefer to do Extension 2 English, and sometimes on timetables, those two subjects actually clash. Or it might be they don't want to do Extension 2. They would rather just do Extension 1 and so on. So Advanced English is the only place where all of the top students come together. And that's why the subject is so hard. Extension 1 English is more English. It is different in the sense that it is highly conceptual. So it's actually the paper for a really good English student who thinks conceptually, they will find Extension 1 a whole lot easier than Advanced. So if you love English and you think really conceptually, Extension 1 is for you. It's a really good subject to do. Extension 2 English is for that really independent learner who has a deep passion for English, who has a project that they've been, that's been on the back burner in their mind. There's something that they're passionate about researching and exploring or writing about. Maybe they've got a story that they really want to develop. That's what Extension 2 English is for. And if that is not you, do not do it. Too often students think it's a walk in the park and they can just, fumble their way through it, but that's not the case. It really is for those who are deeply passionate about English, and they will be the students who do the absolute best at it, and those students who can think in a really creative, original way. It is a brilliant subject for setting you up for university study, particularly if you're going on to do some kind of literature degree at university, but any kind of university study it does. But like I said, it is a very difficult subject. It is also one where I think teachers would say it's tricky to know how things are marked at the marking centre. And I don't mean that. I just mean that in the way that I think lots of teachers have different ideas on Extension 2. And so there's a kind of caution there with it as well. The reality of this is this, though. If you're a really good writer and you write a really good piece of work that stands on its own, you will do well in Extension 2. That is what is paid, as it should be. But it's if you're thinking of doing it because you think it's just an easy subject to do and that you'll get a decent mark, that's where it's dangerous. So I'd be really considering whether or not you are a truly independent learner if you're about to, thinking about tackling that one. And in terms of the courses that you take, like I said, have a look at the assessments for each one to see what it's like. Think about your workload. Can you take on Extension 1 English or Extension 2 if you're doing Extension 2 math? Or can you take on Extension 1 English if you're doing Extension 1 history and you're doing Extension 1 maths and so on? What does that load look like for you? That's the other thing to think about. And I guess, one of the key things is, yes, scaling is important, but scaling only works if you do really well. So lots of students choose things simply based on scaling and go through a really difficult course of study. And what you're better off doing, if you have a look at the HSC reports that come out. You know, you can do agriculture and still get a 91.95. You need to do the subject that you're passionate about and that you will either work hard at. So that goes for English as well. If you're choosing extension one thinking that it will scale well, but you're not going to work at it, well, that's the wrong reason to pick the subject. You'd be better off doing, if your passion lies in history, well, you'd be better off doing that.
I think the most surprising thing that a lot of people, I guess, comes like sort of like, I guess, like counter to what you usually expect is that English Advanced, in my opinion, is the most challenging of the HSC English subjects, because not only again is like everyone, basically all the strong students in like Sydney doing it, but also because there's like the most to memorize, I think, and the most to prepare for come examination time. So I know that when I was like doing my like paper 1 and paper 2 for English Advanced, not only was it like the first examination in my whole period, so I had to go and like really spend all my time before the HSC really preparing for that. I had to memorize about basically 4 essays, or maybe 4 or 5 essays, and just figure out like the proper ways to go and analyze different questions, how to go and change my essays to go and switch them to a bunch of different responses.
Ethan,
and
Sorry, can I just ask you a question on that memorization? And I think this is, sorry for interrupting, but I just want students to have an understanding of what you mean by that, because I think what happens, and this is what I find a lot, is students are thinking they can go in and just memorize an essay. And I think you hit it before that, yes, you have these essays, right? You've trained, you've got this kind of base essay. But what you're doing with that essay is you are manipulating that essay and you are molding it and massaging it to whatever question is in front of you. And that is absolutely fundamental. And that comes from practice, consistent practice.
I'm sorry, yeah, I definitely should have just like clarified that. Yeah, by memorize, I meant like memorize, I guess, like the sort of scaffold for my essay, like the sort of like, I guess, key like evidence or like ideas I want to try and hit during it. Like again, definitely don't just memorize like 1,000 words and just like write it down when the essay when the time comes around. Again, the basis of English is to go and see how well you guys think critically, and in order to think critically, you have to guess like think during the actual examination. So again, it's about memorizing again. Like when I mean essays, I mean just basically the foundations of the essay. Again, Ms. Harper talked about like yes, like some thesis you make to each different question will always change. The sort of points and arguments you make will always change, but sometimes a lot of the time the evidence or some bits of like analysis will stay relatively the same, and that's this kind of stuff which is really difficult to prepare for, because there was such like basically again as Ms. Harper talked about, there's always that one like curveball like there's always that one like really difficult curveball like part of the paper in every single year. I think for 2023, the year I did it, it was module B. That was the most difficult one, or the most difficult like examination question. And for that, because they can give you such a broad scope of like questions, especially for module B, it means that you really have to go ahead and like know the text back to front. And to know the text back to front, you therefore also have to go ahead and like prepare a lot for it beforehand. So I think something to really know is that like English Advanced is really, really challenging. I think it's definitely worth doing it over standard, but at the same time, it's really important that that everyone, I guess, understands the sort of workload and burden that English is going to have on your HSC. And okay, so just again to go move forward a bit, English Extension 1 was the level of English I did. I dropped from English Extension 2 to English Extension 1, again, because of the sort of workload requirements, like from term 1 to term 2. And basically for both extension subjects, it's for students who, again, are really passionate about English, of course, which is really important, but also those who want to have a bit more, I guess, like go deeper into text, but also a bit more, I guess, flexibility to go and choose the text they want to analyze. I think that part of like English Extension 1 and 2 was like really useful as well, because I thought it gave me a lot more scope to go and look for the pieces of literature I was more interested in. So yeah, that's basically the 3 subjects for English. And again, just how I prepared for it and what I thought was useful during my like last 18 years of like schooling was firstly again reading widely, of course, but I also found doing debating actually helped me a lot as well, because reading widely gave me like the sort of vocabulary to go and build off my essays, and debating helped me with the argumentation skills and like the sort of practice writing and practice arguing, which is really important in creating like really succinct, like tight and like really powerful essays. So I thought those two things were very, very important for me. And not only that, I thought that generally because of the fact that I really enjoyed English, I enjoyed the process of writing. That really helped motivate my study and really helped motivate me through the whole process. And again, English is about enjoyability, it's about passion. If you're not passionate, if you don't enjoy English, I wouldn't suggest doing anything more than the required 2 units. And again, don't underestimate the time needed for English. I think before the HSC, about like maybe 40% of my time was spent to English for about, I guess, 3 units out of my 12. So again, don't underestimate the time needed for English and do as much English as you love. I said it again and again, Miss Harper said it again and again. The subject is about passion. If you're not passionate about English or don't enjoy the process of writing, don't take any extension units for the HSC. And yeah, that's about it. And that's about all the sort of like, I guess, experiences I have as a recent student.